talk of any kind. So it's nice to do this.
Good to have you.
Yeah, thanks. Now there we go.
And also, I might interrupt along the way if there's something that I feel need to be clarified or something.
Okay. I may or may not have issues moving my slides forward, but otherwise that's fine. Okay, so yeah, this is UX for startups, and I'm going to focus specifically on the parts of UX that are most essential when you're doing a startup or an innovation project or a new company or a new product, or a lot of startup work is building products and services from scratch. And I think the approach to UX is a little different or a little special when you're doing that. But startup is a broad word in this context. But when I first made the list of things that I thought were relevant for startups and made the first draft of this presentation, I think it was like 100 slides. And that was a little too long. So I took my own advice and focused down on just the most important parts. But that's also why I'm looking forward to the Q&A. So I don't, when I go to see talks, I don't like when the speaker spends too much time talking about themselves. But at the same time, I think it's important that you know that I actually work with this stuff too. I'm the founder, I've been a UX designer for 18 years, and I'm the founder of Peekerton. Peekerton is a relatively new company, kind of a startup in itself, I guess. And we analyze and design digital businesses, and our customers tend to be pretty big, or they're doing valuable things with UX. So for example, we advise investors that are going to buy a whole company for $1 billion about the quality of the customer experience. So we help them understand what the company's worth. And we help build new ventures for corporations or do strategic research for creative agencies. But it's deep research stuff. And as Sebastian showed, I wrote UX for beginners, and that's doing all right. And then I've also worked with lots of different big global brands that you would recognize doing whatever it is that those brands do. So I've been around working on lots of different stuff, and that's why I think I'm in a position to give some advice on these things. But right away, I think every talk on anything always starts with something like, what is UX? And I think the people in this audience are probably at least a little familiar with UX and UI and all of those words. And you might have heard some other terms like CX or service design or business design. So I wanted to start with, rather than what is UX trendy nonsense? Is it even important for you to consider, or is it just part of your normal work? And right now, I think in the world, we are probably reaching peak UX. And in terms of popularity, I think UX has been mainstream for a while, but I think even now, even companies that are kind of slow to get on the bus are starting to consider UX a normal role. But you will hear lots and lots of different terminology. This is very loosely how it's kind of organized, but my point here is that it doesn't really matter what you call this discipline. What matters is the user. But usually when we're talking about UI or product design or interaction design, we're talking about somebody who works with pixels in one way or another. That is usually considered part of UX. The UX also includes behavior and the feelings and the journey of the user, and CX is customer experience, and often you'll see that term more in a business context or maybe an e-commerce context. Service design tends to go out and include things like customer service and the sales process, and maybe a little more things that aren't digital. And then you can keep going out to business design, designing the whole business model. Economists are starting to talk about market design now, which is a whole other thing. And then world design you might encounter in the VR parts of the digital universe. And everybody wants these circles keep getting invented because everybody wants to be the biggest circle. And it's just an ego thing. But yeah, none of that matters. What matters is that the user or the customer is at the center. And that's what we're going to talk about most during this. And just maybe one little note, I'm probably going to say user and customer during this presentation, meaning the same thing. Like I'm going to interchange them. But it's worth remembering that sometimes the customer or the buyer is not the same as the user. So in something like B2B software, the person who will actually decide to buy the software might be an executive or a manager, and the user of the software might be somebody on the team who doesn't control the budget. So it is possible for the user and the customer to be different people, but I'm kind of going to ignore that a little bit and just speak freely as we go through. All right, so that's the intro part, I guess. And now I just want to get right into what we should actually do. So if you're working at a startup or working on innovation projects, you're at the very beginning. You're trying to decide what it is you're doing and why. And I always, as well as in the book UX for Beginners, the very first lesson in that book is that there are two things that you need to solve for any good product or service. And if you haven't solved both of those things, then there's a very high risk that you're going to go in the wrong direction. And it might be a theme during this talk that because innovation can go anywhere you want it to go, that the biggest risk you have in your startup or innovation project is going in the wrong direction. So that's everything about this presentation is about keeping you in the right direction. So the first thing is user needs. And it's shocking how often people will have a good idea that is separate from user needs or just an idea, and then they'll hop on that idea and start working on it without checking to see if anybody actually wants it. So very first, you should go out and start researching users. And this lady here, she has a need. She has put too much balsamic vinegar on her salad and now she is dying. This is a big, so one thing that you will encounter immediately when you start talking to users and researching needs is that you will get, it's like a fire hose of opinions and information and problems in there like this. And some needs are more valuable than others. So when you're researching, we're looking for needs, not wants. And there are way more wants than needs. And if you're especially if you're trying to build a company around this user need, then it needs to have enough value to build a company around it or to build a whole new product around it. So we're looking for very significant user needs. And you'll have part of the task here when you're user researching is to tell the difference, I guess, between what's a need and what's a want. So there are a few slides in this presentation. I don't know how that will be made available, but I'll make the PDF of this available. And there's a few slides that are good to look at just as one, like all in one page.
We'll share the slides and the recordings afterwards.
Great. So this is the first of, I think there's 3 or 4 of these type of slides. So how do you know if a problem is valuable enough to solve? There's a few of these. So first of all is how many people feel this way. If you have a problem, if there are 100 million people in the world crying because they put too much balsamic vinegar on their salad, then you actually might have something. That would be a pretty big problem. And maybe if you're the kind of person that designs salad dressing bottles and you find that this is a massive issue, then I don't know, there might actually be some money in it. Odds are this particular problem is not the one, but first of all, it's just like a scale, how many people. The second is how often, and these kind of multiply each other. So if somebody has balsamic vinegar on their salad, if those 100 million people who have this catastrophic problem, if they have that problem once per year, maybe like the value is okay. But if they have it every day, now you have 100 million people having this problem every day. So that is a much, much more valuable problem in terms of frequency. Third is how long will this problem last? So I think as far as any salad I've ever had lasts for one mealtime. But if we imagine that this salad is something that she has to eat for a year and she has to struggle through this massive salad dressing problem for the entire year, she's probably willing to pay quite a lot to fix that problem sooner. So that's another multiplier. How strong is the feeling? She was crying in that picture, so that seems like a pretty strong feeling. And it's the same principle there. The more you feel it, the more valuable it is. What happens if you don't solve it? Maybe she's saladed with that vinegar as the only option she has for food, but maybe she could choose any other food she wants. So there might be lots of substitutes. So in your case, if you're building a product or service, there might be some other easy way to solve this. And if you make it hard to use, then people will just go do that. My favorite example of that is when the American space or NASA, when NASA spent $1 million inventing a pen to write in space, and the Russians brought a pencil. So if there's a really easy substitute, then your innovation might be dumb. How else can you? And then would users agree that this is a problem? So often there is a problem in the world, but the people experiencing the problem don't actually realize that it could be another way. And if they're not aware of that the world could be different, then you might have to educate them or explain it. So it still might be valuable to solve, but you have to convince or explain to users to do something different. And finally, what would this change really if you solved it? There are apps every year that come out where the main purpose of the app is to take 2 other apps and put it in one app. And the big problem it solves is that now you don't have to switch between those 2 apps. What does that change really? Like if Facebook and Twitter are now together in one app, great, I save milliseconds every day. Who cares? So in terms of measuring the value of a problem, it's worth thinking about what does the world look like if that problem is solved. So it's a very good checklist. You could probably do a whole workshop just based on that. Yeah, so if we're trying to if we're trying to research user needs, there's lots and lots of ways you can do this, but I thought I would point out a few just to get you started in case that you're new to user needs. Hoping or wishing for people to come tell you some brilliant idea is usually the slowest, worst way to do it. So don't do that. But first of all, this may seem completely obvious to some people, but you should go out and talk to people. If you have users, you should talk to them. If there's a problem you like that you might want to solve, you should go talk to people that have that problem or find them. And this is just it's the obvious place to start. And yet when I ask people in real life, what do they do for user research and user testing? The answers that I usually hear, definitely there are people in companies that do this, but the answers are usually something like, oh yeah, we did that once, or once per quarter, we do a user interview with a few people, or I've been actually at a shocking number of companies that do user testing with their own colleagues, like people that work at the same company. And that's the user testing. And this is the lowest bar for user testing. It should just be part of your life to be talking and like just observing and getting information from people that have problems like this, or understanding what their life is like around the problem. So yeah, just aim high, aim to be constantly talking to users. Another simple one is when you see something that looks like a problem or a behavior that seems inefficient or something that you could solve, it's classic, start asking why. And then when you get an answer, ask why again. And then when you get an answer, ask why again. And the whole idea here, I make notes like this myself. Like I've been doing this for a long time and I still do this method all the time. I make a lot of notes trying to deconstruct problems into what are the basic building blocks that make this problem happen in the world. And if you take things down to the most basic possible level so that you could explain it to a kid, then sometimes it starts to make you think about why that came up. Like if I said, why do people buy rubber ducks that look like superheroes in the store? You really have to think about it. Like, what is the motivation behind? It's basically just that sort of quick, happy feeling in the store, and it's an impulse purchase. And you could decide whether that's something you want to get on or solve or not solve. But trying to deconstruct something that seems pretty basic and obvious into an explanation or a few different possible explanations is usually a good exercise. And then when it happens pretty often and more when you're a UX kind of person, that you'll see people doing things with technology that doesn't make any sense. It's not the way you intended. But when you see people who really struggle with tech, or they're afraid of technology or computers, that's really when you should pay attention and ask them questions. I always find it interesting to know, when somebody struggles with a computer, what did they think was going to come, or what was their expectation, or what is it about the way the computer actually works that doesn't fit with their model of the world. And often, very often, you can get pretty good ideas about how to simplify things that way. All right, so that was user needs. That's the first part. Always start there. The second thing is company needs, and parts of company needs are usually what people will do automatically, and parts of company needs are almost always ignored. So let's go forward here. So this is a quote from Peter Thiel. He founded PayPal and Palantir. Competition is for losers. And what he was getting at here is that everybody's or a lot of people's natural instinct is to compete. And what Peter Thiel was pointing out is that you should try to avoid competition as much as you can. Competition is bad for business, but yet our first instinct, like I've seen many times where somebody will start a startup because there are already lots of startups in that space, which automatically means you're going to compete with a lot of other companies, and that's immediately hard. So there's a few different ways we can look at that. So right away, let's admit that every company needs money. Even if you run a nonprofit, you still need money just to make things work, to achieve your mission. But you have to pay people, you have to buy stuff. So this isn't a greedy thing. We just need to start at the ground floor here, and that companies need money. And typically, money comes from customers. If you're a charity, then it would come from sponsors or patrons or something, but those are basically customers in that case. And so one way or another, you need to get a bunch of other people to give you some money for your product or service. And the catch comes with that competitors want the same money as you. There isn't enough money to go around. That's why you're competing. And as soon as you have competitors that are trying to get the same money from the same people, now you need a plan. And you can't just build any product. You need to build the product that's going to succeed to get the same money, or get the money from those customers instead of your competitors. And in the traditional business world, that's what we call marketing. However, in the UX world, that's what we call UX strategy. And they're not exactly the same, marketing and UX, but this is where they touch each other and where you should become good friends with your marketing people. So on the first day of marketing class, if you probably would have heard of a value proposition. And the basic idea of a value proposition has a couple ingredients. So we're not just building a product that makes money. We need to do that by serving a certain customer, a target customer, better or differently than competitors. And I've highlighted these two things because the value proposition depends on both customers and competitors. And it's very common in the world to go and look at competitors for inspiration, which means you're trying to be the same, which means you're not competing. Or if you are not considering what the target customers want, the user needs, then you might be building something that nobody wants at all. So if we take the things that you can do and the things that your competitors can do best and what customers want, then we get this sort of strategic calculus happening here. And this chart, I use it all the time. I use it in lots of projects when we're creating new companies. And I think this could be on the wall in every office because what your intuition tells you to do every day is not necessarily what you should do. So if you look at A, where it says you win here, that's the overlap between what you can do best and what customers want. So that's where you win. Over at B, you die here. So that's what your customers also want that, but it's what your competitors do best. So then that's where you need to decide what product you can build and what product you should build. So if you notice here that what you can do best, most of the things you can do best are not in the circle of what customers want. And a lot of things customers want are not in the circle of what you do best. So everything outside the overlap area is dangerous. And the reason I started with user needs first is that user needs basically are a filter for all of your ideas, that you want to take the user needs and just the parts of the user needs that you can do best. And that's what your product should be. And X in the middle here, if I can go back for a second, is the stupid area, because it's what you and your competitors do best and nobody wants it. So you can do a great job and nobody cares. Okay, so this is company needs. Like, this is a sort of basic strategy, and that's what your company needs. And your company strategy should change your product. It should allow you to say yes or no to certain features. It should allow you to understand where you're going to be able to do something useful and where you're going to compete a lot, and you want to avoid the competition. So just a few general, this is another one of the slides that are good to look at as one big slide. A couple examples of how you might think about your product. So if you are the first or the second in the world to do something, then can't read my own slide here because then you have a big advantage because you get to set the rules. But if you're not the first or the second to do something, then you have to be good. You have to be better than most of the other companies in your space. So if you have competitors, then the question is, how are you better? Can you be cheaper, faster, better? I said better again, but better how? And if you're not cheaper, faster, better somehow, then you're just the same, and you're counting on the fact that the market must be massive because there needs to be enough customers that one company can't serve all of them. So yeah, look for a huge market. If you can serve a customer that's being ignored by bigger competitors, that's great. Big companies actually usually generalize their stuff, so they usually leave somebody out. And if you can serve the people that are left out, that can be a really good place to start. But if you can't serve a customer that big competitors can't serve, then you have to fight with them. So, and usually the fight comes on price or usability or something like that. Can you do it in a way that's hard for competitors to copy? So sometimes your method is different. And if you can do it in a different way and competitors will struggle to chase you to do it the same way, then that's a good thing. And if you can't, then you either need to be first or you need to be faster, because they will copy. Can you make it easier for customers to buy compared to your competitors? Sometimes a company can succeed doing exactly the same thing, but they make it, it's just easier. So the perfect example of this is SaaS software, so software as a service. And in the old world of B2B software, you have to call the sales guy, and the sales guy has to call you back, and then you need to have a demo, and then maybe there's a meeting and blah, blah, blah. And it takes like 2 months to close a deal. Whereas with software as a service, the users can sign up for free, they can pay with their credit card, they never have to talk to anybody, and the first time they talk to a real salesperson might be when they have to upgrade. So then the company can just make it easier for customers. And if you can't make it easier to buy, then sales or marketing is going to be where you have to fight. Do you have another unique advantage? If there's nothing unique about you, then it's going to be all branding, and then it's a marketing problem. And then in our world, in technology, we can often do things that physical products can't. So some products create network effects, like a social network, or lock-in, where the longer you use it, the harder it is to leave. Or if there's other switching costs, like if you're familiar with Apple computers, it's hard for you to switch to a PC. If yes, then you should actually build your whole product around the idea of acquiring customers, as those things help customers stay for a long time.
Joel, can I jump in with a quick question? What are the most common misunderstandings here? Like I'm guessing there are scenarios which you completely misunderstand your own uniqueness, in a sense.
Yeah, overconfidence. If you just don't spend time looking at your competitors, a lot of people spend more time sort of talking shit about their competitors instead of looking and respecting the strengths of their competitors. So I think it's less about a misunderstanding and more about not taking the time to understand. But actually, on the very last slide of this whole thing, I mentioned a few things that people often do backwards. Yeah. Okay. So to go from a product to a business, it's not about user needs or company needs. You need to solve both. That's when it becomes a business. In our case, a startup. So now the key there is to align user value and business value. In other words, this is when people are actually happy to pay for things and buy stuff. Okay, so when we're taking these user needs and company needs and putting them together, it's really important to understand that the value of the value of the user need and the company needs are a matter of perception, and so is cost. So the company has costs that they to be able to deliver that value, and the user usually has to pay or do something to get that value. So there is a cost as well. And it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking about value and cost as money. And that is one kind of value or cost, but so are feelings or emotions. And there's whole industries where people are only paying for how it makes them feel. Basically, the whole entertainment industry, for example, that the main value of it is feelings, but also cost. That sure, price, like the money you spend to get something is a cost, but in the same way, the feelings that you experience while you're trying to get it or using it are also a cost. So if it's just frustrating as hell to use a product, then that's a cost, and that's on top of the money that it costs to get that product. So that's why usability tends to be a competitive thing and can be even a competitive advantage. Because if two companies solve the same problem in kind of the same way, but one of them is painful to use, then the other company will win just because people hate using it. And that's kind of the foundation of UX, is that we want to make the value as high as possible and the cost as low as possible, including emotions. And for your product or service to be, for the user value and the company value to be aligned, we need to take these two things that are different. The value to the company is not the same as the value to the customer, and we need to align them so that they happen together. That's the best case scenario, at least. So
quick info, another 15 minutes before Q&A.
Okay. So I'll use a super simple example, or an example that everybody's probably familiar with, just a normal e-commerce web shop type store. So you go online, you search for products, and you do the checkout, and then you buy. So this could be a buy now button, or it could be an upgrade now button in your software. But at this moment, if the customer is getting more value by paying more, then customers are often really happy to be paying more if they can get the value that goes with it. But there are actually a lot of things in the world that ask the customer to pay just to remove a barrier to maybe get value. So imagine if an e-commerce store had a front page where you had to pay to get into the store, and then you can shop if you want. That would frustrate a lot of people, and that store would probably fail generally, just because you don't know if there's going to be value for you or not. So you're paying to remove a barrier instead of getting value. And it's part of the reason why the whole paywall on news sites is a bit of a struggle, because they can't figure out how to make enough money, but when they deliver the value, so they're locking you out until you pay. So it's not that it won't work, but it's a lot of friction for the users. So we want to align that value, and then there's the matter of cost. So one question to ask is where's the value for users? And this depends a lot on what you're building. So it's hard to say exactly what it will be for your product or service, but on the right here, there's a list: usage, time, accounts, etc. So you have to ask, what is the actual thing that's going to deliver value for the users? In an e-commerce store, it's the product that they're buying and that they've picked. But in some other software, it might be how much storage you've bought, or it might be on Instagram, it might be how good you look and how many people can follow you, or what kind of data or insights can I get? Can I run a business like on Shopify? I can run a business of my own on Shopify, so that maybe that's the value to me. So you need to answer that part, but you also need to look at where is the cost for the company in delivering that value. So if we think about our e-commerce store example, that it seems kind of obvious that the user pays at the same time the company, like when they pay when they click buy now, and then the company sends out the stuff that they want. But if you imagine, let's say hypothetically, that a user could go onto the store and pick all the things they want and then click send it to me, and then the user can decide whether to pay or not when it gets to their house. That's not a good idea. But if it worked like that, then you would ship out all the stuff and the company would pay to do all the shipping part. And then maybe 40% of people would return their stuff. So then the company would have all the costs for 100% of the orders, but they would only make the money from 60% of the orders. And that's because the value and the cost aren't, and the value for the user and the company aren't aligned. They don't happen at the same time. So it's also worth talking about that. In that scenario, the more, if you had an e-commerce store that worked like that, the more customers you have, the more the company would go down. That you'd lose more and more money as you grow. So that business model fails eventually. Yeah. So just a couple of random examples here. So Google as a product makes it easy to find any website. That's the user value. But the user and the customer are not the same. Customers are advertisers that are paying, and they pay for people to find their website. So it's free to search because that's the user value. And the more people that are searching on the website, the more value there is to the customers who are actually paying. And when Google first started, there were other search engines, but Google focused on making a better search results first to maximize the user value. And that's how they won against competitors. But then when they had taken over, then they maximized customer value. And yeah, they're also an auction model. But it's okay. So Airbnb makes it easy to rent out spare rooms, and they don't charge you money to come onto Airbnb and look for a place. They charge people when there's an actual booking. So at the moment that somebody is finding a place to stay or renting out the place that they own, that's when Airbnb makes money. So it's very tightly aligned. Strategically, the problem there is that Airbnb is pretty easy to copy. So they were first though, so they made sure that they invested in branding and building trust. And that was a lot of what their UX was about, is making sure that everybody, the people renting out rooms and the people renting rooms, knew what was going to happen and everybody felt safe. And so that is hard to copy. Dropbox obviously syncs your files across things, and it's free for everyone, but you pay to add more storage. And in theory, there's no reason why they couldn't make you pay per file. It's much worse as a business model, but they didn't, because the value is for people is having enough room to make sure that they can store everything and they're not going to run out. Now, the strategic detail of Dropbox is that when you have all of your files synced in Dropbox, it's kind of a big jump to go switch to something else. And that's what lock-in is. So they have good lock-in, which means they need to pour all of their resources into getting customers in. So once the customers are in, they're unlikely to leave. And that's where their pricing model actually came from. That's why it's free. It's not free just because they're nice. It's free because that's the lowest barrier to get in. And then they can work on you over time to upgrade for more storage. Yeah, just for context. All right. How much time do I have? A little bit. Okay, so when this is the last bit here, and then we'll just talk about some common mistakes. If you're a startup or an innovation project, at some point you're going to have to build an MVP, or I mean, this applies to every version of everything you make, but this is what I have found the most useful to focus and make sure that you're only building the most valuable things at the beginning. Because at the beginning, you have very few resources and you can't afford to go off in some random direction. And the best method I found is starting with what I call the moment of truth. So the moment of truth, usually in any product or service, there's usually some specific button often, or some kind of action where that moment is where the value happens. So in the e-commerce store, it is the buy button at the very end of the checkout. That click creates the value. And I worked at Scribe, which is e-signing contracts online. So the signing the contract or clicking sign is the moment when the value is created for both sides. There's usually something like that in every product or service. So if you can identify when that moment of truth is, that's the first, you want to start there and work backwards. So, so your entire MVP is built around the single path to that value creation. So if this is our buy now button, customer value and company value happens at this moment. So the first question should be, what do we need for somebody to be able to buy or pay? And the thing right before that, we can't pay if we don't have a way to pay. So the first thing the last thing you need right before that is the actual, in this case, I said credit card info, but there could be lots of payment methods that you want to put in, whatever. So you need credit card info. Then the next question is, what do we need to be able to process that credit card? So we need to take you through the checkout flow where we get your name and your address and anything that's maybe legally required to do that. This might be a very different kind of flow depending on your product or service, but it's the same thought of moving backwards. Then if they're in the checkout flow, we must already have some products or something selected. So we have to put those products or select them somehow. So that's where the add to cart thing happens. And you can keep going back in every step until you get one complete path from value to the moment when the customer or user enters, whatever that means in your product or service. And there might be a couple of different ways to get from the entry to the value, and then maybe you want to map out 2 or 3 of these, but it's usually very, very few things. And if you only build those steps that take you from entry to value, then what you have created is basically your MVP. And that can be tested. That's the smallest product you can build that can be tested in the real world with real people. And even if you don't launch that as a full marketing push thing, you can definitely put people in front of an app or a computer that's built like that and have them do that single flow. And you'll find any little details you might need. And then after that, this is kind of where the circles start to be a real thing. So what you've just done now is like the core product that solves the business and user needs. And now you can start wrapping it in the things that you might need to actually operate in the real world. Like you might need a brand, you might need a social media account, you might need customer service, you might need salespeople. It depends on what you're doing. But then you can start working out in different rings to just make the things that support that value conversion. So these are the kinds of things that sound good or sound easy on paper, and then you get struck with reality when you try to do them in real life. So just had one slide about where each of these things tends to go wrong, or the common ways these go wrong. So on the left side under do, this is just the stuff that I went through now in this presentation. And then on the right, I have ways that these things are often, just like, good. I had to try to move everybody on my own screen. Okay, yeah, the ways that these things tend to go wrong in real life for one way or another. Okay, so it may have been obvious, but this whole message of this presentation is to do research first. And universally, the fun part is to actually do the design, or if you're a programmer, to write the code or whatever. Like everybody wants to jump in and start making stuff right away. And research never happens if you do that. So, or it happens too late, and then you have to undo the things that you did wrong. Focus on customers' experience. Hopefully that was a clear message. But what happens in a lot of companies is that some companies focus on their experience of the customer. So I've seen lots of customer journeys where the only things that happen to the customer are actually happening to the salespeople or whatever in the company, and nobody talks about what the customer is doing or feeling or why. So then you have big gaps in your customer experience, and sometimes you can fall into those gaps. Define user needs and companies first. That was the 2 things. And one really common killer of startups is that they try to grow or expand or get too broad with their product before they have really sorted things out. And that's when you start burning money or hiring too many people, or you're building and designing at the same time, or all those things kill lots of startups. Talk to users was my basic thing, and do not study friends and colleagues instead. It's totally okay in like the very early prototyping stage if you just want to run your thing by some friends and see if they understand it. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about pretending to do user research by only getting people that you already know. Those people will tell you what you want to hear, and you won't learn anything good. You want to talk to people that will hurt your feelings, because that's when you're really going to learn. Start with the most valuable problem, and then the don't part is build everything users complain about. It's really a common misconception to think that UX designers are supposed to gather up requests and design that. And that's not what we do. We're supposed to understand the problems really well and then design the product that will solve it. And that might mean excluding some requests. Consider emotional value and costs, especially if you're having meetings with developers, who I love and respect very much, but developers are very rational people. And so you might overlook the emotional value sometimes. So money and pure function are not necessarily user needs, or the only ones. Be different or better or both. So don't copy your competitors. I see like every week somebody talking about online as a designer going on to get inspiration or references from their competitors, and that's the way to be the least competitive product you can. Avoid competition. Similarly, I mentioned that a lot of people just talk down about their competitors because that's really fun. It's fun to talk about how you're going to disrupt them. But what happens in real life is that you're usually talking about the product you want to build, and you're comparing it to the product they have already built. And that means they're winning because they already have a product. So you should respect the strengths of the competitors and play the game in a smarter way. Make a product that solves user and company needs. Sort of similar to jumping in without research, but don't make features if you haven't considered how those features fit into your bigger strategy. Make sure that you're going in the direction that is best for you. Align user value and company value. The don't is ask for money before you provide some value. It's really common to start thinking about how you want users to pay you, and not why a user would pay you. Focus your MVP on the moment of truth. The opposite of that is building a full product before you can test it with users. Maybe obvious, but also common. And then finally, think about UX that is beyond the product. There's no sugar-coated way to say this, but there are a lot of startups whose main plan is to get VC funding. Like that is the business plan, and they make whatever product they think they can sell in a pitch. And that's not a business, first of all, but also it might surprise you what VCs like or don't like in a pitch. Don't assume that you can predict what product you should build to get their money. If you focus on making value for users, VCs will eventually listen. And that is it.
Awesome, Joel. Really appreciate the experience, best practices. I'm gonna quickly. Is there another slide on with the? Yeah. So again, go back to one slide. So I guess they have there's Joel's contact details. Joel@peekerton.com if you want to reach out afterwards. Skip one more slide. And yeah, we really appreciate any feedback that we can get. So I'm gonna launch a survey that's gonna take you 10-15 seconds to answer, but we really appreciate any feedback. Again, going back to Joel's point, we need to know that we're creating value here. So feel free to share your opinions with us. So I'm gonna let this poll run for another minute or two. And then we're going to jump in and have a 10-minute Q&A. I didn't want to interrupt you, Joel, because you're making so much sense. So I wanted you to finish your last thoughts there on the slide. So we're going to have a 10-minute Q&A. And let's see here. There's a couple who have not responded to the survey just yet. We learned that we used to do this as a UX thing. Joel, you were part of this lesson for us. We used to do the QR thing. I guess you guys remember. And we noticed that there's a lot of friction. People don't like to pick up their phones, scan a QR code, go to a website, and then fill out our survey. So we learned our user experience lesson by instead launching the native survey here. So, and obviously we get way more responses now. So lesson learned. Thanks for providing feedback. I'm going to keep it alive for a little bit longer. If someone, like, there's a couple of people haven't responded yet. I'm going to keep it alive for a little bit. Let's jump into the Q&A. Any questions, feel free to unmute and ask Joel a question.
What could I have done to move those 4 stars into 5 stars?
I have a question. Can I start?
Shoot, go for it. Hey, Christopher.
Chris Williams here. I'm at a small cryptocurrency startup. One thing that I've been promoting or trying to do is create sort of a beta community for new features and new functionality, get feedback from the users. And then we've got sort of an internal debate. Do you have an opinion on should a company in the startup space reward users for feedback by offering some kind of future benefit or discount for their feedback? Or does that skew the results typically and encourage people to make us happy? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a good question, a very good question, and I run into it a lot. I think the cliche scenario is, should we give users movie tickets or the first thing? So I do like having some kind of a feedback community and beta testers and all that stuff. I think that's a good thing to do, and there's lots of good feedback you can get from it. And then the temptation is to feel like that's complete. So I think that you also need to dive into some of the patterns that you start to see if you start. But in terms of rewarding them, I usually recommend starting with not rewarding them. And then you get but then you also get the super fans driving the product, which is sort of the opposite bias. So that's kind of where the completeness thing comes in, is that it's a very good source of input and information to help you get opinions, and you just can't feel like that accurately represents the world. So do it and also do other things.
Fair enough. Yeah, okay.
But rewards get real expensive if you start scaling up.
That's what I'm worried about, yeah.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of people that actually like giving feedback, and you should give them somewhere to do that.
Yeah, so just kind of create the community type feeling that their feedback is heard, but not to offer them too much, I guess, or anything at that stage, because that will bankrupt us.
It's a very good reason. But also I've seen a lot of companies have some kind of a like suggestions forum or something like that. And it's very tempting also to take those suggestions and turn them into developer tickets. And that's also not the way it should work either. You should be assessing the value of all those different things. It's really common for a problem that's like number 20 to be the best one to start with.
Okay, thanks for the feedback.
I have a question.
Shoot.
I'm watching this with some bittersweet emotions, because we just ran a project where the final feedback when we were rejected from further financing was that we did too much research, and obviously we failed at getting the investor on board in understanding how important that research was. So my question is that do you have experiences of communicating the shift between a ready product and research during an investment period?
I have so many questions.
Yeah, and opinions as well.
Maybe, but most of the questions are like what type of research and what type of investors and what is the product or innovation you're working on?
Well, we set out to solve the problem of personal retention in our business, automotive business. I am from Scania.
Okay.
And we did this under the Scania Innovation Factory umbrella.
Okay.
And well, I'm biased, of course, but we felt that we had to do a lot of research to understand the problem, the root of the problem. And we probably ended up doing more research than was perhaps expected. And
why did the investors, are these investors or stakeholders?
Investors.
Okay. Why did they think too much research was a problem?
Because there was not enough weight put on the business planning, business side of things.
Okay. Without knowing more, my guess would be that it might have been hard for them to understand how the findings from the research translate into business. That probably like in the top 3 questions all time that I've heard from everybody everywhere is about how to convince stakeholders, and I guess investors are basically stakeholders, just how to convince people in your company to value or go with what you think should be done. And it's 9 times out of 10, it's that their priorities are not the same as your priorities, and that they just don't see how it connects. In often, like Peekerton work is often on the business level, where we're hired to do something that needs to move the needle on the whole company somehow. And usually where we start is trying to quantify the problem so that we can put a number on how much this problem is costing the company. And sometimes that's hard, and sometimes you have to talk around your assumptions and whatever, but like it's much harder for stakeholders to say this doesn't seem valuable when you say how valuable it is. So there's lots of missing pieces. I feel like that question could be an hour conversation.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But it's probably something in there, like what they care about and want, and what you care about and know, and just getting them together.
Yeah. Well, if I can just rephrase the question, you had a do's and don'ts list. Do you feel that investors follow the do list or the don't list?
How can I be diplomatic about that? Not always. I think there's lots of other factors in there, including the opinions of other investors and news and blah, blah, blah. Like, does investing in scooter companies right now follow the do's and don'ts list? Hard to say, but but that's at the same time, like there's a whole game to play there too. This, I feel like I want to have drinks and 2 hours to really dig into.
Yeah, I'm sure you can probably do a virtual beer as well over that topic. I'd love to be a fly on the wall on that subject. It always feels like the investor perspective sometimes gets more influence on the product decisions than the founder and the team themselves have, which I think in early stage is very, very risky, because they are too far away from the users and the customers and the real problem.
Yeah, and actually I can say this, that I have it's only in the last couple of years that I've worked with investors from the inside. Excuse me. And seeing their whole process in detail from the inside, I think if everybody that had a startup could see the way they think about investing from the VC perspective, nobody would ever build for investors. Like it's just all the wrong priorities, because it's not the way they look at it. If you walk into a VC office and you say, we have this many customers and they're paying this much and they're staying for this long, you get an investment. And honestly, the VCs will probably come to you if you have that. And that's when they are most persuaded, is when the VCs have heard about you and know you're doing something that's working. And now they want to talk. Whereas the pitch deck thing, like those pitch decks go in the garbage. So it's the actual results is by far more persuasive.
Mm.
Thanks, Joel. Jussi. Yeah, shoot. One last question.
Thank you. Hi, Sophie from Buapa. Thanks for a great workshop. Yeah, so you talk a lot about talking to the customers, but my experience is that the customers who want to talk are the customers who already loves the product. Do you have any tip to going around that issue?
That is tricky. That's kind of related to Christopher's question too. Getting feedback from people who love it or hate it is easier. You could also, maybe there's a few things. You could find people that fit the profile of who should be a customer and do some testing with them.
Who are not using the product at the moment.
Yeah, like
Okay.
a sort of a perfect, a potential customer, because everything about them is accurate except the fact that they don't use the app, so they're good like that. Another one is sounds kind of straightforward, but is surprisingly good, is if you can pick users not based on who gives feedback, but if you can somehow select them and like contact them, you can just randomly pick people and get input, but also ask users, even the ones that love giving feedback back, if you ask users to teach you how to use the app, sometimes people love it because they don't actually get it, which is a very counterintuitive thing. I've had people explain, I worked at a startup as a consultant where there was a button where you could save things, and you had to save it if you wanted to be, it was like I'm going to oversimplify now, but it was like coupons, deals. You had to save it if you wanted to be able to use it in the store. And nobody understood that. Everybody thought you saved it so that you could put it in this list over here so you could find it again later. And that's a sort of a subtle difference, but nobody understood that what they were saving, or what they were doing when they saved it, was activating the deal, and that you couldn't use the deal if you didn't save it. So there were people going into stores and then scrolling through the list of what they wanted to use, and it wasn't there anymore because they didn't save it. And those people didn't like the app. But the like organized people who just love saving things for organization's sake, they thought the app was great.
Nice.
But yeah,
Awesome.
try to find some other way to pick users might be the easiest.
Yeah, we're on that note. We are over time as always when it's an interesting subject. Sorry to interrupt, but thanks, Joel, so much for taking your time and sharing your experience. Looking forward to jumping on a quick fireside chat with you afterwards, if someone is curious to hear that conversation. Thanks to everyone for jumping in and joining the workshop, and have a wonderful day, everyone. We're gonna share the slide and the recordings afterwards, so no worries.
Great. Thank you.
All
very
right.
much.
Thanks all. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.